Back at it again with your number one stop for all things polling and election analysis in the United States. And today we're going to be looking at the latest Rasmussen national poll with Donald Trump against Harris and to see what the crosstabs show on this map. Hit the like button and subscribe if you want more content just like this. So as you all know, I am doing sort of a polling experiment, creating my own national and state averages to try to be the most accurate aggregator that basically is out there. And right now, when you weigh all the polls by party, what's very fascinating is Donald Trump is at 47.6%, Harris at about 44%, so Trump is leading by 3.6%. And the latest Rasmussen poll average would end up actually being around the exact margin we currently have in this average. And their average in 2020 was about Biden plus 5.2. Their average in 2016 was overestimating Clinton a little bit. And so Rasmussen's average of polls and our aggregator of a bunch of different polls are actually very similar. And not only that, the latest poll from Rasmussen in the full field has Trump at 49%, Harris at 46%, but we still include RFK in the national average because we're going to see his support fade over time so we can kind of track who gains what support. And funny enough, Trump is at 47% in this matchup, and we clearly see here Trump is at 47.6%, Harris at 44%, and we see that she's at around 45%. RFK is at 4%. We see that RFK is getting 4% in the national average. Stein and West are a little bit below the 1% mark that they do get in this poll here. About other is about 3%, so maybe they evenly split that vote with Chase Oliver 1% each, which isn't that far off from our national average. So even a pollster that actually is the most accurate national pollster we have, they are pretty close to what we have in the aggregate. So we here at On Point Politics are trying to create a national average that's supposed to dispel all polling errors. And funny enough, the pollster that tends to be the most accurate nationally is basically matching our aggregate right now, which I think is very fascinating stuff. Now, guys, they do have a YouTube channel where Mark Mitchell, the head pollster, who I've recently gotten in contact with, there's a possible collaboration that may happen at some point. But we look here, we have the demographic crosstabs, and this is what I use for this video to kind of show you guys where Trump technically is right now. Now, something that I didn't know is that 538 uses the Fox News voter analysis exit poll from 2020, which apparently is more accurate, according to SoCal Strategies, the pollster that I sponsor on this channel. And so when you plug in the racial demographics for the latest poll, we see Trump is up by about 4 points. And Trump is actually gaining Virginia from the last video. So from the last video, looking at the Rasmussen crosstabs, he actually narrowly gets Virginia. And we're going to be going over some of the margins in these states because this is very interesting. And again, this plays into Trump gaining way more with minority voters than even gaining with white voters. He actually loses ground with white voters in this poll compared to 2020. Now, polling does typically underestimate Trump with white voters, so that may possibly be the reason why we see something like that. But realistically, these are the crosstabs for this poll, and going from bluest to reddest, we're going to be going down that path. So obviously DC, Maryland, Massachusetts, Vermont will still be safe Democrat states in the poll right now. Rhode Island is actually still safe, believe it or not. Again, Trump is losing ground with white voters but gaining with minority voters, and this kind of really rewrites the map politically because you're going to see really weird margins out of some of these places. So Washington in this forecast is actually a little bit over a 15-point win, which it's so weird. But again, he's losing ground with white voters, and places like Washington, the Northeast, tend to have more of a white population. Then now looking at Connecticut, that is about a 14-point win for Harris. We look at a state like New York, that's a 13-point victory. That kind of matches some recent state polling we did about a month ago. Maine's first congressional district is safe in this forecast. Oregon right now is about a 14-point win for Harris. So Oregon's actually voting to the right of Washington. But not only that, California is only a 13-point victory. So California is voting to the right of Washington, which would make sense because California has a lot of minority voters. I mean, especially in the Los Angeles and San Francisco area. And if Trump is gaining with Hispanics and African Americans more than he is with whites, he is losing ground with whites in this national poll from 2020, it would actually make sense for California to vote to the right of a state like Washington. Keep going here. We see Maine at large, Delaware, New Hampshire. They're likely margins of victory. They basically remain unchanged from the previous election, mainly because, again, more of a white population, and Trump gains or loses ground with white voters. So whatever he would have gained with minorities, he basically offsets that with the loss of white voters in the Northeast. So that's another interesting tidbit as well. Colorado is about an 8-point victory. So Harris does actually lose ground in Colorado, which is pretty fascinating. Looking at these, results here, Maine at large is actually a 10-point win. So Harris would actually gain from Biden, and New Hampshire is actually about an 8-point win. So they become more Democrat than 2020, which is kind of interesting because our polling averages actually have Trump winning those states unless the electorate's really going to change that much. But again, this is a singular poll from Rasmussen. If we did an average, maybe it's a little bit different, but I still wanted to show this because I think it is pretty interesting when you look at it this way, and I think that Rasmussen kind of deserves to have their polls showed on an electoral map. And New Jersey, only 5-point win. Only a 5-point win. Illinois, 6 points. Like, those states get really close. Illinois and New Jersey are basically 2020 Biden margins in Maine and New Hampshire, which, again, is really fascinating stuff. Minnesota actually still stays in the likely column, too. If we actually look at it, it's actually a little bit over. It's about 5.9%. Hawaii in this forecast is only a 6-point win for Harris. I mean, Trump gains Asian voters quite a bit in this poll. I mean, I use the other demographic group Cashapp and I kind of apply it, but Harris is in it for a competitive race in Hawaii if these, demographics hold up. Virginia is the state that flips to Donald Trump. From the last video, it's basically a neck-and-neck race, which again is very interesting because this is our polling averages adjusted by party, and every state, Texas is actually in the safe category here, and we see Virginia is effectively a toss-up. So our polling average, supposed to basically match by party, matches the most accurate national pollsters categorization for the state. Now, again, these are not official categorizations from Mark himself. This is just looking into the crosstabs from 538. But I do think it's very fascinating that it's kind of lining up with my polling average quite a bit. Harris is literally up by 0.4% in the Virginia average. Like, it's basically neck and neck. And looking at, for example, Virginia, Wisconsin, only a point victory for Donald Trump, which is very fascinating. But again, if you're losing ground with white voters, you're going to have a bit of a problem in a state like Wisconsin that's 90% white. Michigan in this poll is a little bit over a point victory for Donald Trump. Pennsylvania is about a 4-point win. This is the interesting one. Look at Pennsylvania. It's actually a 3.1 percentage point win, which is very similar to the national average we have for Pennsylvania. I think our average now has Trump winning it by like 2.7, 2.8. Michigan is like a 2-point race, and here it's about 1.4. So, like, that's very fascinating that these numbers are matching up with my polling averages. New Mexico, our average has Harris up by 2, but Trump is gaining so much with Hispanics that he's actually winning this by almost 5 points. I mean, not exactly 5 points in this forecast, but it's very, very close. I mean, he's winning New Mexico by more than the Rust Belt, which is very, very interesting. A very, very interesting analysis there. Arizona is a huge victory. Funny enough, it's actually a 7.6 percentage point win. Our moving average for Arizona is actually an 8.1 percentage point victory in our forecast here. The state of Iowa is actually only about a 7 point, I believe it's like 7.8. So it actually gets bluer from the last cycle. Again, Iowa is a very, very, very white state, not a lot of African and Hispanic population here, hence why the small shift to the left. Ohio is very interesting. This one is actually a way bigger victory than Iowa. This one's about a 12-point victory, presumably because Ohio and has more Hispanics and African Americans than a state like Iowa would, and so that's why it's voting to the right of Iowa by a pretty considerable amount. Looking at a place like Nevada, that is a 9-point win, and we have our moving average at 6 points for Trump right now. And looking at Georgia, this one is just astounding, a 14-point margin. This one is well outside our moving average, but again, very interesting that the electorate here is about 30% black. So if Trump's really cutting that margin down and really getting 29% of black voters, that's going to be huge in a state like Georgia. That would be humongous if he's getting 29% of African Americans nationally. North Carolina, a 10-point victory, a little bit over 10.3% in this forecast here. Actually bluer than Georgia, funny enough, which is pretty fascinating. Florida is still in the likely column right now, and so is Maine's second, which is about a 9-point victory. So Trump actually gains in Maine's second, but loses ground in Maine's first. Florida is still in the likely column at 14 points for Donald Trump. And now looking at, Montana, this is where we get into the safe category. 16-point win, 16-point victory in Kansas, 15-point win in Alaska, which is exactly 15 points. And so pretty much every single state after this should be in the safe column again. Look, Texas, almost a 20-point victory, and our moving average has Texas as a 21-point win. So a lot of this stuff is aligning up somewhat very interestingly. All of this is sort of lining up to be a very interesting map for the former president. Nebraska's first is a huge margin, and Nebraska's second actually is a lean Democrat district, funny enough. So again, very, very interesting stuff here. And so when you basically put down all of the crosstab data for the Trump-Harris matchup from the latest Rasmussen poll, you get Trump getting 330 electoral votes to the Democrats' 208. But again, Trump losing ground with white voters can possibly hurt him, and if he loses enough, that may become a problem. But I think it's very fascinating that Trump basically can win through the Sun Belt. I mean, he literally can. He's winning North Carolina by 10, Georgia by 14, Florida by 14, Texas by 21, New Mexico by almost 5 points. You're talking about a 4.6 percentage point win there. Arizona about 7, Nevada 9. Like, if he literally could win through the Sun Belt, like, he wouldn't even need any of these states. I mean, Virginia, at that point, he could basically go for anything here. Nevada would be the biggest victory out of any of these other states I have in blank. And so he really, if Trump really does this well, and these demographic crosstabs really hold up, Trump actually has a victory path through the Sun Belt, which is very fascinating, and Virginia is the main toss-up race here. And funny enough, the second bluest red state here is actually Wisconsin. It's only a point victory for Donald Trump in this video. So there is a legitimate possibility of getting this map. Like, this map could actually happen if these demographic crosstabs were to legitimately hold up, as time goes on, and we'll see what happens. But again, the national average that we have and Rasmussen's national averages are basically lining up almost perfectly, and Rasmussen's national averages have been some of the most accurate in the industry. And so make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you want more content just like this, and I will see you guys in the next video.